Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation. I would like to contribute to this discussion by highlighting 3 points. The first is that we are now in the Atlantic area affected by common phenomena, but in diverging trends. The second point is therefore, what do we share? I think we share challenges. And my third point will be, how could we together address those challenges? As for the first point, well, after 5 years of crisis, the global economy is weakening again. This risk of a new major contraction cannot be ruled out. A recession is ongoing in the euro area, and a slowdown has surfaced in many areas in the Atlantic as well as in other parts of the world. Anyhow, the Atlantic area will see a mixed year in 2013, and that's the point that I would like to say. Despite the short-term trends, what we are observing is a major structural change in the globe, and in particular a shift in wealth, where the center of gravity of the economy is moving. And economists that likes geography tried to identify 40 years ago where was the center of the economy, and more or less was in the Azores Islands. At present is close to the eastern border of Turkey, and is still moving east and in part south. Now, if we look in fact at the forecast for these years in the Atlantic area, we see that in Latin American country, we see a forecast of 3.2% of growth, which is much different from North America and North Europe. Africa is around 4.5, and if we concentrate only on sub-Saharan Africa, in other terms, we limit the impact of what was the Arabic Spring, so-called, the rate of growth is 5.4. In other terms, these situations are not the same, and the trends are diverging. In a certain sense, we need to change our narrative. It recalls to me a joke of Albert Hirschman's that speaks about 2 people that meet each other, and one says to the other, "Paul, what's happening? It has been 20 years. You were small, now you are big, you are thin, and you were fat." And the other says, "My name is not Paul. You have changed so much, even the name." Exactly, the situation has changed, and we cannot continue to look at it with the same glasses. But therefore, if there is divergence, what is the purpose of this meeting? Why are we here? Well, because despite different situations, we have similar challenges. Let me quote 2 of them. The first has to deal with productivity. We know the productivity is flat in many Latin American countries and difficult in many African countries. Not to mention the fact that in the northern part of the Atlantic, productivity is slowing down, in part related to the crisis. Many developing countries are facing a series of challenges that are related to the specialization in raw material production. We all know what are the consequences of it: Dutch diseases, therefore increasing rate of exchange, difficult to compete for manufacturing industry, and in particular small and medium-sized firms that were just mentioned before, and therefore how to guarantee an increase in productivity. By the way, it's not just a matter of being competitive, it's also a matter to being capable to employ young people that are present, enormous mass of people entering in the labor market, particularly in Africa, which is the youngest continent in the world. This is one challenge, but then there is a second one that contributes to define the phenomena that many call the middle income trap. And this second phenomena has to do with social dimension. Inequalities are growing in the north because of the crisis, in the south sometimes associated with growth. In effect, growth is necessary for development, but is not sufficient, and inequalities and relative poverty is growing strongly. That's an issue, because middle classes, in other terms, those that have left poverty, extreme poverty, thanks to growth, remain vulnerable. And vulnerability, that means potential possibility to fall down again in extreme poverty is not a good condition as the expectation of people that has left poverty in the past, well, have grown. If you don't find an answer, then there are social tension appearing. Arab Spring is an example. Phenomena in Thailand is another example. Chile with the students in the street is another example again. This was my second point, common challenges. Now, what to do? And here comes my third point. I think that it's matter now to create this table. In other terms, possibilities for policy dialogue across countries that share similar challenges. And they concerns, in one end, policy for competitiveness or new industrial policy, if you prefer, to address the phenomena of economy diversification as raw material growth cannot be sustainable in the long term. They concern also social policy, because social protection is needed when people that have left extreme poverty don't want to fall down when they have a divorce, or people are sick, or simply they retire. As they were working in the informal economy, when they retire, they don't have any form of pension. Now, these are two areas on which policy dialogue would be extremely helpful across the Atlantic. I would add a third one. No policy can be done without resources. Somebody mentioned today the ODA and in general the aids. I don't think that the aid can be the only tool to address policies. We need mobilization of internal resources, and many countries continue to have a rate of fiscal revenue extremely low in respect to the GDP of the country. In Central America, we are speaking of countries with 13% of taxes out of GDP, as well as in Colombia or in Peru. This is not the same in the north of Atlantic, where we are talking about 35% of taxes out of GDP. The capacity to create policy and to intervene to address these challenges is much bigger. With some exceptions that concern Argentina or Brazil, a lot needs to be done in this field. So, Mr. Chair, these were my three suggestions. We have different trends, but we have common challenges. There is a reason, therefore, to have tables like this and start discussing about policy and their implementation. Thank you.